Hi everyone, and Happy New Year. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday break and you've started out this new year refreshed and rejuvenated. I would like to say that I have, but truth be told, I feel like these last few weeks were just crazy. I had all of these video projects that I was going to get caught up on. And just out of nowhere, I had this feeling one day that I needed to put together this video compiling testimonies from Latter-day Saint Native Americans, as well as clips and footage from videos of archaeologists, DNA experts, and Book of Mormon scholars, and to put all of this into one video. Now, truthfully, I thought this video would be no more than 30 minutes max. And for those of you who have seen it, it was close to 2.5 hours long. I'm going to share something towards the end of this video that's a pretty fascinating side note, something that came to my attention after I had already put the video out. So I'm going to share that towards the end. You'll definitely want to stay tuned for that. I had no idea this video was even going to happen until after the break started. So that was my break. It took most of my free time. And so I started this year already feeling a little bit behind, just a little bit overwhelmed. And so my goal this year is to work on that and do my best to get caught up on my projects while at the same time managing my life a little bit better each day so that I can be able to do all of the things that I do outside of this YouTube channel and be able to have quality time with my family. So we'll see how that goes. So let's start out by talking about January 1st of 2024, and we'll just work our way from there, and I'm going to show you a pattern that I noticed along the way. So New Year's Eve, as we were celebrating here at my house with my family, I told my kids, well, we're headed into the Year of the Dragon, and I wonder what that's going to look like. We went to bed on January 1st, about 1:30 in the morning, and sure enough, when we woke up to the news of the earthquake in Japan. The earthquake was recorded on Monday, January 1st, 2024 at 12:10 a.m. Mountain Time. Now, it was a pretty powerful earthquake, and earthquakes continued afterwards. It destroyed buildings, split open the ground. It's been reported that there have been about at least 110 deaths, with hundreds still missing. The earthquake also triggered fires, and so there was fire, destruction. In fact, it was even reported a day ago by Business Insider, here's a screenshot, that the entire Japan coastline shifted 820 feet after the quake. So it even changed the face of the land. So not only did it lift the land out to sea, but it extended parts of its coastline by as much as 2 football fields. Here's a before and after. The before is on the left, the after is on the right. A 7.6 earthquake is a pretty powerful earthquake. And that's how we started off 2024. And that wasn't all for Japan. The very next day, on January 2nd, a Japanese Coast Guard aircraft was struck by a Japan Airlines Airbus A350 with 379 people on board. The plane caught fire and turned into this massive fireball, but miraculously, everyone on board survived. Here's what's unfortunate. In this article on Inc.com, this is what they had to say about it. There was nothing miraculous about it, or if there was, it's because the airline created its own miracle. So giving credit and glory for this miracle to man. One of the biggest reasons no one died is the crew's swift reaction. They popped out the emergency slides the moment the plane stopped moving, and then moved passengers to the slides swiftly but in an orderly way. They insisted that passengers leave everything but their phones behind. It likely helped that Japanese culture values discipline and acting as a group, so that people quickly obeyed those instructions, and that pilots and flight crews from all airlines are trained to get passengers off planes within 90 seconds. In the end, it took only 18 minutes from the moment the plane touched down at one end of the runway to the moment the last person was off it. That includes time for the plane to roll halfway down the runway where it collided with the Coast Guard plane that was supposed to be elsewhere and then continue rolling another 2/3 of a mile while burning until it came to a stop and the slides could be deployed. It's my belief that God is always in the details, and there's a message that we can take away from this story. There were so many stories and events that happened between New Year's Eve and January 2nd, and there was so much happening that it was pretty easy to not catch it all because of all of the chaos. So another story that took place on New Year's Eve here in the United States on the West Coast. Interesting that all of this is happening in that Ring of Fire zone, all the way around Japan, off the west coast of the United States. It seems to be that in this Ring of Fire zone is where we're seeing these patterns take place. So on New Year's Eve, in California, in LA, on Hollywood Boulevard, actor Ian Ziering, known for his role in Beverly Hills 90210, was attacked by a group of bikers while in his car with his daughter. The video made headlines everywhere, and the story seemed to stay in the top headlines for the whole week. Now, what's interesting is the meaning of the name Ian, some pronounce it Ian, is God is gracious. It comes from the Hebrew name Yohanan. Ian is the Scottish Gaelic version of the name John. Well, who wrote the book of Revelation in which we read about the dragon and the prophecies of our day? John. The surname Ziering actually comes from the German surname Gering with a G. This name means brave and strong. It also means spear and was anciently associated with the tribal conflicts of the Saxony-Weimar area. Now, if you think about that conflict, spear, brave and strong, it very much depicts what we saw in that video. How this one man held off a whole mob of bikers single-handedly without having to go to the hospital, and they caused great damage to his car. In fact, it was crazy because as I was watching it right here, you'll see in this clip right here, some of the attackers almost came across as looking like stuntmen, like actors, like they were intentionally swinging at him and throwing punches, but missing their target every time, as though it was intentional. Some commenters said they looked like a bunch of uncoordinated, clumsy clowns, and other people said they looked like actors, and so some people thought this was an action scene for a movie, and lots of people were just plain confused. Well, I was curious, so I looked at clues from what the bikers were wearing, and I saw this 605 on their clothing, and I was able to find an Instagram page for this group. Here it is. It's called the 605 Mini Bike Gang. And as I looked at their Instagram posts, what I saw were lots of videos showing these bikers out riding, not just for a nice, relaxing bike ride, but doing things in these videos to get a reaction, to create attention. And in a lot of these videos, they show footage of police cars following them, chasing them, pulling them over, or them noticing police responding to a scene, and they intentionally ride their bikes around that scene so that it appears they are somehow involved in that incident with the police. For whatever reasons, this mini bike gang wants to come across as creators of contention, fear, and chaos in the community where they live, and they seem to be pretty proud of it. And this incident that happened with Ian Ziering sort of seemed to be their world debut, sort of like an appetizer of what's to come for people who live in that area. Now, it's interesting, one of the videos I noticed on their Instagram page, they're riding down the street, and right above them are these two dragons. Right when I said that, I looked up at this video, and I was 4 minutes and 41 seconds into recording this particular segment. There was that pay attention number 144. But as I looked at this, There was a lot of symbolism in that image. These fighting dragons on this terrace and this gang of bikers riding underneath it. This guy has his arm up in the air and they're cheering and screaming as they ride underneath the dragon. There's a lot of symbolism in that image. This actually is a street in Chinatown, and I found this website that explains the history behind these two dragons. It says the Chinatown Gateway Monument is a strong visual symbol of mutual cooperation, harmony, and prosperity for the community and the city. The gateway honors the rich ancestry, culture, and history of the Chinatown community. The Chinatown Gateway also signifies a warm welcome to all visitors to Chinatown and the city of Los Angeles. Here again is that number 144 on a screenshot pertaining to Ian Ziering. In fact, here on Ian Ziering's social media account, I happen to notice he has 14.4 thousand followers. There it was again. I kept seeing that number all over these news stories. Pay attention, not necessarily to the stories themselves, but the patterns and messages. He was reported as saying, "Yesterday, I experienced an alarming incident involving a group of individuals on mini bikes. While stuck in traffic, my car was approached by one of these riders, leading to an unsettling confrontation. In an attempt to assess any damage, I exited my car. This action unfortunately escalated into a physical altercation, which I navigated to protect myself. I'm relieved to report that my daughter and I are both completely unscathed, but the incident has left me deeply concerned about the growing boldness of such groups who disrupt public safety and peace. The situation highlights a larger issue of hooliganism on our streets and the need for effective law enforcement responses to such behavior. As a citizen and a parent, I find it unacceptable that groups can freely engage in this kind of behavior, causing fear and chaos, while the response from authorities seems insufficient. I have always been an advocate for standing up against intimidation and misconduct, and this incident reinforces my belief in the importance of personal and community safety. We must address the underlying issues that lead to such disruptive behavior and ensure that our streets are safe for everyone. I urge city officials and law enforcement to take decisive action against such lawlessness and provide the necessary resources to prevent future occurrences. I'm thankful for the support of my family, friends, and fans during this time. It's in challenging moments like these that the strength and unity of our community are most vital." Okay, so I don't know about you, but I took away a lot from that message. The theme lately up where I live is strengthening our stakes and communities so that we can build up Zion, because Zion's stakes are what will be the refuge against the coming storm. So when Ian said, it's in challenging moments like these that the strength and unity of our community are most vital. That's exactly what we talked about at our stake conference. In fact, there was an entire training video which inspired the theme of our stake conference. And this training video was led by Elder Christofferson. And this last week, our bishop sent it out to all members of the ward and asked us to watch it. And it became the topic for our 5th Sunday discussion at the end of December. So right before celebrating the new year, this is what we were talking about. The importance of strengthening our ward and having that unity. Those are the exact 2 words that Ian used in his social media post. Strength and unity, which he said are most vital, which is exactly what the message was in our stake conference in November. So I find it interesting that that has been an urgent message for not only northern Utah, but areas of Utah where some of my friends and family live, where they also received the same instruction from their leaders coming from the Quorum of the 12 to focus on strengthening and building up Zion in their communities. Because of the things that are coming, we have to have these places of refuge that will be within our own stakes. Now, as you can see, there is peace and safety within the walls of Zion. Outside of that, there is chaos and fear. And that is what the adversary wants to bring right now, I believe, in the year 2024. Now, just because that's his plan doesn't mean that we have to feel unsafe or be afraid. Just as Ian Zering is seeking peace and safety within his community, we are promised the blessings of peace and safety in the stakes of Zion. Now, I did a video a couple of years ago talking about this year 2024. A couple of years ago, I noticed that on the Chinese calendar, 2024 was the year of the dragon. And so I have been visiting this topic in my videos over the last couple of years. Now, of course, as we finished out 2023 with the book of Revelation in our Come Follow Me study, every mention and reference to the dragon was prophecy being spoken of about our day. This is what we are entering into. So right away on January 1st, I start thinking about this dragon. And I thought to myself, what do dragons symbolize? What is it that I need to know about the dragon? Now, of course, in Western culture, especially in fairy tales, dragons breathe fire. So I always connect dragons to fire. Now it's interesting because the very first day of the year of the dragon, we start out with a great shaking. It's almost as though the dragon is making its presence known. And it starts to breathe out that fire. And there's fire and destruction in Japan. And a fireball on an airplane in Japan. Why Japan? Well, Japan happens to be the land of the rising sun, and they are given this name because they are the first land to see the sun every morning when it rises. Japan is the first to see the sun, and they were the first on the first day of the year of the dragon to experience the effects of the sun with the solar flare. Now, mind you, at the time, I'm seeing 144 everywhere. 144 is a pay attention number for me that always seems to pop up in relation to things that pertain to the gathering of Israel. The 144,000 spoken of in the book of Revelation, who were sealed on their foreheads, sealed with the mark of God, as they partook in that great gathering of Israel. Here's that number, 144, in connection to a headline with the breaking news of the story of Flight 379. And it's interesting because it says the plane on fire. So there's that word fire. There's that pay attention number, 144. As we're gathering in Israel into the stakes of Zion for peace and safety, the dragon is breathing down fire all across the earth. It is happening. Now again, on New Year's Eve, headed in to January 1st, the first day of the new year, the year of the dragon. The sun hurled out an X-class solar flare that hit the earth and began to cause radio blackouts in the polar regions. As I was watching a video about how these solar flares tend to trigger great earthquakes in the earth, I was looking at this image right here. I took a screenshot, and as I looked at all of those marked regions where earthquakes have been happening, I saw an image of a red dragon. Here's what I saw. It's as though this solar flare again was this dragon spitting out fire towards the earth. Now there is an increase of these solar flares happening on the sun. And according to this article, X-class solar flares are the most intense flares which can result in long-lasting radiation storms. If the X-class flares are too strong, they can result in loops that are 10 times as big as Earth, which leaps off the sun's surface as the magnetic fields cross over. This is according to NASA. When these loops reconnect, they can produce as much energy as 1 billion hydrogen bombs. Now remember, in the book of Revelation, in chapter 7, that's where John makes mention of the sealing of the 144,000. And he starts out in verse 1 talking about these 4 angels that he sees standing on the 4 corners of the earth. Now what's interesting about this is in the video I just put out about talking about ancient voices that testify of the Book of Mormon, these tribes, all of these native tribes that I made reference to, speak of these 4 angels and the 4 corners of the earth when speaking about their prophecies about our day. Now John sees an angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cries out to these 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, and he pretty much says, pause, hold off on your destruction, until the servants of God have been sealed on their foreheads. And we read further on in the book of Revelation, John talks more about this, and he says that the servants of God will have his name in their foreheads. They will have taken upon his name. They will have his image in their countenance. Now we know, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that the sealing of the servants of God of the house of Israel takes place in the ordinances that happen within the temple. So these are saints who have been sealed in the temple, in the Lord's house. This is under the order of the holy Melchizedek priesthood. 144,000 of the tribes of the children of Israel, in other words, covenant Israel, those who are participating in that gathering of bringing scattered Israel to the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, bringing them back home into those covenants. So the angel says, wait until this is done. As soon as they are sealed, you have the green light to drop the hammer, or in other words, release the kraken, release the destruction and chaos upon the earth. When this happens, John sees fire and desolation poured out upon the earth right before the Lord returns. Again, he sees fire and desolation. The definition of desolation is a state of complete emptiness or destruction. It can also mean misery, sadness, unhappiness, and gloom, an anguished misery or loneliness. If you are not bound through Jesus Christ, through covenants, if you don't have a covenant relationship with your Savior, Jesus Christ, and you don't know him, you would feel sad, miserable, and lonely, especially as you're watching these things take place all across the earth, and especially in your own community. Also, during this time, I see the number 144, along with most of you, when news broke about mission leadership assignments being announced for 2024. New mission presidents and companions for 144 missions worldwide will begin serving in July. So when I hear this, I think about the 144,000 who go out and gather in Israel. These mission presidents and their companions, their wives, are servants of the Lord, ordained under the holy order of the Melchizedek priesthood for this purpose of gathering Israel. And I'm feeling it. They are going out this year in July, the year of the dragon, 2024, to spread the gospel, gather in Israel. Again, it's like a chessboard, the Lord's kingdom and the devil's kingdom. That great battle is taking place right before our eyes. And as the Lord moves around his chess pieces on the board and uses his strategies for building his kingdom, The adversary, or the dragon, is working just as hard to compete with that, to counter that. And so we know if this is the year of the dragon and he's making his presence known, he's coming out of the sea, creating shaking and destruction, spewing fire and smoke, creating chaos and fear, what is it that the Lord must be doing that would cause the dragon to make his presence known in such a way? Something to think about. Again, 2024 is the year of the Great American Eclipse, crossing over and creating the X marks the spot here in North America on the New Madrid fault line. I've been talking about this since 2017 in my Happy Lady videos on this YouTube channel. As we come to the end of those 7 years from when the first Great American Eclipse took place, and about the halfway mark in 2020, we had our own shaking here in Utah when the angel Moroni dropped his trumpet off the Salt Lake Temple, a temple which has been prepared to withstand a great earthquake, a temple which will open its doors in 2025. A temple that is now expected to be opened in 2026. When the project first took place, the goal in mind for the end date was 2024, and then it got bumped to 2025, and now it's 2026. It almost makes you wonder if by 2026 we will have gotten over this hurdle of craziness and chaos. Maybe the temple will open during a time of peace. Now, in the temple, every LDS temple, we have altars, and it's on the altars where we pray over those whom we care about. So we have something called the temple prayer roll, and anyone who is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has access to this prayer roll where they can call the temple or go onto their app on their phone and submit names of those whom they care about who are struggling in some way or another, physically, emotionally, whatever it is. And those names go into a bag that is placed on the altars of the temples, and they stay in the temple for 2 weeks and are prayed over by the saints daily. So John talks about this. He talks about how there's an angel standing before the altar, and there's this incense that's being offered up in the form of the prayers of the saints. Now, it doesn't just say the saints, it says all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. So the saints throughout the world, in all of the temples, over all of these altars where we're praying over these names, those prayers are going up to heaven, and it's compared to incense, a sweet fragrance ascending up to the Lord. And as this happens, the angel takes the censer, fills it with fire, the fire of the altar, and casts it to the earth. This reminds me of what we're seeing happen on the sun with the solar flares. These solar flares that are being hurled or cast towards the earth. That's what this reminds me of. And I'm feeling it. What this symbolizes, according to the book of Revelation, is these events are to be testimonies. The testimony of the voice of thunderings and the voice of lightnings and the voice of tempests and storms, the voice of the waves of the sea heaving themselves beyond their bounds. In other words, tsunamis. He talks about hail and fire mingled with blood and everything beginning to burn up. Trees and grass and all things that were once green. This makes me think of a drought. He speaks of a great mountain burning with fire, which is cast into the sea turning red or becoming as blood, and on and on. We've talked about this before, and much of this description sounds a lot like the results of a nuclear weapon or some other type of anomaly falling from the sky and hitting the earth, creating destruction. Now it's interesting because there is reference to these 3 woes. Woe, woe, woe. And it reminds me of a Hopi prophecy that talks about 3 great shakings of our day. So at this point, I'm going to take a break and play a clip of a fireside that was given by Lance Richardson years ago. Actually, a few of you who watch my channel shared this fireside with me this week. And I do own one of his books, and so I believe I did hear this years ago and completely forgot about it. So as I was listening to it this week, it very much paralleled the things that we have been talking about, the events that are happening on the earth right now, as well as things that were talked about in that video I put out last week about the ancient voices that testify of the Book of Mormon.
As we were doing that study, we began to study some of the other cultures around the world that we started hearing, hey, did you know the Hopi Indians have some information about an ancient Zion-type society, a utopian society? No, I didn't know that. So we started making some contacts, and before long, we ended up down on the Indian reservation in Hopi land in Arizona. They tell the story that their people were not native to this land. They actually came across the oceans in ships and came to this land, and that they then settled on this continent, and they were a very fearsome people. The time came when they, as they said, we were converted unto the Great White Spirit. This occurred before what they called the great star appeared in the sky. Well, they were so converted that they took their weapons of war and they dug a hole and buried them in the earth and took an oath that they would never take them up again. After this period of time, they continued to migrate northward until they came to where they live today. A long time ago, the Creator called His children together, and He explained to them what He called the true life plan, and explained to them how they should live in order to live in peace and harmony. He told them that He would split them up into 4 colors of people, and they would go throughout all the world. But the time would come when many of them would turn against the true life plan and would begin to become at war with one another and to not associate one with another. Well, He told them that after they were scattered, the time would come when they would start coming back together again. And they would be able to recognize whether their brothers were keeping the true life plan by this handshake. Well, about 2,000 years ago, the day came when they were living in where they are in Arizona at this time, in a place called Old Oribe. And that is the oldest continually inhabited settlement in North America. A man came out of heaven and appeared to them, who was wearing a long white flowing robe, had a beard that was forked, had bluish-green eyes, and he spoke of peace and taught them the original teachings, or the true life plan, again. At that time, he also greatly increased their productivity as far as their lifestyle, helped them to understand. He gave them corn, for one thing, that is the lifestay of those people. And he taught them what they should do to live in peace and harmony with one another. Well, he stayed with them for a short period of time, and during that time period, he gave to them a set of stone tablets, which they have to this day. Now, I have not had a chance to see them personally, but I have interviewed 3 individuals who have. Now, they claim that there's only 5 or 6 white men who have ever been given the privilege to see their stone tablets, and so I was happy to just be able to interview a couple of them who had. But most fascinating experiences, they called this individual the Mosau. Now, there was one village in Hopi land that called him Mosiwa. And I found it very interesting that both of them were very close to the name Messiah. Their story fits so closely with the story of Jesus Christ, and many of them believe, yes, it was Jesus Christ. Many of them do not believe that. But I guess I happen to be one that does believe that from their story. He told them that he was the first and the last. And he told them that when he was ready to leave, they pleaded with him to stay. And he said, I must go unto my Father, but I will come again. Well, in any case, he left with them these stone tablets. And he told them that he was going to give stone tablets also to the other color peoples of the world, the black, the yellow, and the white. They shared their story with me, and they said that we have met and seen the plates that the Tibetans have, and they claim that the Tibetans are their cousins. The Kikuyu tribe in Africa also, they said, to have a set of these stone tablets. They claim that there is another set of stone tablets with the Swiss people, with a group of people that live high in the Swiss mountains. And they have never seen those, but they have been told that they have them. Now, to them, it was significant that each of the 4 groups lived high in the mountains, and that that was part of what precipitated who received the plates, I guess, or the records. But these stone tablets contained the original teachings of the way they should live in peace, as well as prophecies of what would come from the time he left until the time he came again. And he promised them that when he came again, he would live with them and help them build a society of utter peace here on this land. And they're anxiously awaiting that day to take place. Now, the prophecies that he gave to them and told them would take place before the time he came again are very, very interesting. And most of them have been fulfilled. Almost every single one of them have been fulfilled at this point now. But he also warned them about this. He told them the world would be shaken 3 times before it came. The first 2 with one hand, the third time with both hands. But he told them that in that third shaking, that power would be taken away. And so if they became totally reliant upon it, they would suffer. And as the Masao continued with his prophecies to them, he told them, as I mentioned, that there would be 3 great shakings of the earth that would take place. The first 2 would be less powerful, as if with one hand, but the third would be with 2 hands. And he explained to them that they could avoid that third shaking if the people would turn back to God and would keep the commandments he had given them. Well, the first shaking, he gave them some prophecies to watch for that would take place around that time period, and they would know that the first shaking was about to take place. Well, the airplane, the Model T, all these things came around the time of the First World War. And so they believed that the First World War was that first great shaking. Another one that he told them would take place would be they would see a black ribbon that would start to cross all across the continent. Clearly the black ribbon stretching across would be our road system. Another one that I thought was fascinating, the way he actually described it, was a cobweb that would cover the earth, and people would speak into it, and they'd be heard clear on the other side of the world. And you think about how you would maybe describe our telephone system or internet system for that matter. They would see a people rise up in power that were governed by a sign or led by a sign that he drew on a rock. And I've seen the pictures of the rock, and the sign is clearly the swastika. Well, clearly Germany had that sign, and he told them that they would join with the people of the rising sun, and they would bring about this second great shaking of the world. Now, the second great shaking was to end with a gourd of ashes being dropped from one of these carriages in the sky. And where it landed, it would destroy everything where it landed, and nothing would grow for some time or be alive in that area for some time. Very great description of what took place with Hiroshima and our bomb. One bad note to that, though, was he told them that the white nation that dropped that gourd of ashes in that second shaking would have a gourd of ashes dropped upon them in the third shaking. Now, he gave to them a number of other signs to watch for. One of them was a sign that they were told when they saw this sign, they would know it was time to go out and let the people know about all these prophecies. They were told to keep them to themselves until this period of time. Interesting, the Incas also had this same story. They said that they were told that they were not to go to the world and share their prophecies or their vision of this golden age of peace, as they called it, until they saw a particular sign. The Incas, their sign was there would be an earthquake that would take place, and the land would open up, and down below there would be a temple of gold. In 1949, the very thing took place. High in the mountains in Cusco, Peru, 14,000 feet up, there was an earthquake. It split the mountain open, and underneath a monastery in Cusco, there was a temple that had much gold in its working, as well as silver. Now, this happened to be one of the temples or one of the deposits that Francisco Pizarro was looking for. When he came to the Americas, he went to the Incas and had heard about this temple of gold and was seeking to find it, as well as many of their treasures of gold. So they ransacked the entire civilization, destroying their buildings, destroying the people, burning everything in sight nearly. Interestingly enough, they had saved these large caches of gold and silver. They told later the reason they had saved these and buried them was that the great white God had told them when he returned, he would join with them in building a society of peace, and in it would be a great temple, and that they were saving the silver and gold to help build that city and to build that temple. Kukulkan, who is the Mayan name for this being that came to them. A lot of different names that this individual was called by, but the stories seem to correlate with every different culture about this great white God coming and visiting them, teaching them. In some cases, and this was fascinating, was we found that the Mayans and the Aztecs told us that when he came, he not only taught them about a way of life, but he taught them the arts, he taught them sciences, he taught them astronomy, he taught them how to grow cottons of many different colors. I told them that the time would come when they would see this sign, that they would see a house of glass that would come up, it would be built on the east coast of Turtle Island. Now, all of the countries of the world would send representatives to this house, and they would talk of peace and seek to bring peace to the world. Well, he warned them that those who came to that building, that many of them would only talk of peace, and that their pretenses were for power and gain only, and to not trust many of those who were involved with it. But anyway, they were told that when they saw that house of glass, they were to go, they were sent a delegation back to that building and deliver a message to the world of what would take place if the people did not turn back to the great God. Well, in 1959, they saw a newspaper with a picture of the United Nations building in New York City. And they said, there it is, the House of Glass, it's here. And so they sent back a delegation. It was actually a delegation of 6 men composed of several different Indian tribes. And they went back and they petitioned to go in and deliver the message and were refused 3 times. The third time, actually, they had a vote and gave the veto vote to the United States. The United States said no. And that man's name was Henry Cabot Lodge, and they have a hatred for him up to this day because of that fact. However, it's interesting to note, just the other day I found that there's one of the great Hopi elders, a man named Thomas Bayanka, and in 1992, he was allowed to go back to the UN and deliver their message. But when they were refused, they wrote it down and tried to pass it on in writing, but they don't know whether it actually was ever read. But they tried to warn the people that the time had come when that third great shaking would occur if the people did not change. Another thing that they were told would be, and this was also a sign that they were about to start receiving some of their rights and freedoms back. And that was that they would see an eagle that would rise up off the ground, fly up into the skies, and land on the moon. They said, and then there we were sitting in 1969 with the rest of the world. We heard, Houston, the eagle has landed. The other sign that they mentioned, that they would see a house that would be thrown up into the sky, and it would stay there. And men would go up and start living in it. And I said to him, ooh, Mir Space Station? They said, yeah, that's our interpretation. They said, also could be Skylab. One of their prophecies actually told that this house would then fall from the sky and look like a blue star falling from heaven. Now they said that they have talked to observatories in Australia that said that from the angle of Australia, when Skylab fell in I think it was 1979, that it looked like a blue star falling from the heavens. And so that would be also a fulfillment of that prophecy. In connection with that, there was one tribe that had a very interesting prophecy about these carriages that would fly in the sky, and the time would come when the carriages would begin falling from the sky. The sea or the ocean would turn black, and the living things in it would begin to die around it. Now, they believe that that was certainly the oil spills, such as what took place in Alaska. They also said that morality would be gone from amongst the people. Corruption of the white man's government. This was something that they talked quite a bit about, the fact that the white man's government would become so corrupt that no one could trust them. And that certainly has taken place in many ways. Now, the Mosal gave the Hopis a number of different prophecies to watch for that would be signs leading up to this third great shaking. And these are very interesting. One of the signs was that they would see men who would start saying, I know more than the great creator. I want to be a woman. And they would change themselves to be a woman. There would be women who would say, I know more than the great creator. I want to be a man. They would change themselves to be a man. Another one that they were told was that women would start wearing men's clothing, and that women would start raising their skirts higher and higher until they began to expose the parts that were most sacred to their body. He told them that time would speed up so much that families would no longer spend time together, that grandparents would not take time for their grandchildren or their children, and parents would take no time for their children, and that the sanctity of the family would be destroyed. He told them that there would be a great commotion within the nature, that there would be great tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, there would be tidal waves, the seasons would begin changing to the point where the Chippewa and the Okinawans also had a story that people would get to the point where they couldn't even plant their crops. It's not El Nino that's causing the commotions of the world and of nature. He said, it is the sins of the people. He says, Mother Earth is shaking and quivering and quaking with the wickedness of the children on earth. They were told that there would be a black people who would come upon the land, and that they would have 2 uprisings, one for their rights and freedom, and second, for power. They believed that would be part of the third shaking. They told them that there would be villages that would be built that would be so high you could not see outside of it. And when that third shaking took place, these villages would start to tumble down upon the people. And the people inside these large villages you could not see out would be destroyed. Told them that man would find the blueprint of life and that they would begin making their own animals. Now, can you imagine a statement like that that many years ago? And now we watch genetic breeding as well as cloning. Schools would become an enemy of the people, that they would seek to change the teachings and traditions of the people. One other sign that would be of interest was the fact that there would be an alignment of the planets, and that when the planets aligned, it would be a sign that the third shaking was imminent. It would take place at any time at that point. The time would come when the bear and the yellow people would come together and attack our country. And you think about the bear being the sign of Russia. Well, during this period of conflict on our land, they were told that it would look like we were about to be overthrown when a group from the West would rise up and come forward and save the country from destruction. And they were told that that group from the West would be their true white brothers, and they were to join with them, and Moscow would return. And what they called the Bahani would come from heaven, and Bahani is interpreted the people of light. People of light would come down and join with them and help them in creating a society of peace on this land. Now, as we talked about that society of peace, it was really interesting to discuss that. They believe that time will come when it will completely cover this continent, and that it will be an entire nation of freedom. And they said, we believe that we will be sent throughout the world to bring the true Hopis to our land, to live with us and to join with us. Are you saying then you just believe it's just Hopis? I said, oh no, what I mean is the truly peaceful ones of the earth, because Hopi means peaceful one. They said, we will go throughout the world and we will bring them to join with us in this society. Their vision of that day and time is so masterful and wonderful. It is so neat to look at the different prophecies of the different Indian tribes as they have told about what would take place in that day and time. It is just incredible. And they said that this time of peace, they were told it would last for 1,000 years, an entire millennium. And so they're waiting for that day and time.
So John goes on to talk about, in the following chapters of the book of Revelation, the description of these woes. And they definitely sound like wars. I've talked about this before, so we won't get into all of this in today's video. But he goes on to talk about the imminent apostasy of the church. And this seems to be a reoccurring headline as well. So many people losing their testimony right before the Lord returns. It seems like every day there are videos popping up left and right of people who are experiencing that desolation, unhappiness, sadness, loneliness, misery, while choosing to walk away from the covenant path and doing it with a trumpet, not walking away quietly, but creating quite a scene while exiting. And it's about this time in chapter 12 where he's talking about this that we're introduced to the dragon. So if you go down to verse 17, John tells us that this dragon that he sees is the devil himself, Lucifer, who fell from heaven. He is the dragon. In verse 17, the dragon was wroth with the woman, who is the church, covenant Israel, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. So those who were living on the earth at that time. Those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. That is enemy number one to the dragon, you and I. John sees this dragon working miracles in order to deceive men. And they fall for it. They think he's amazing, incredible. Now in chapter 13, he talks about the sea, the water, the ocean. Again, we've been talking about this area, this region known as the Ring of Fire in today's video. This is where he sees this beast rise up out of the sea with the 7 heads and the 10 horns, whom the dragon gives power to. So John goes on to talk about all of the craziness that happens during this time, and he takes notice of the patience of the saints who, throughout all of this madness and chaos and destruction and deception, they continue to keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And as plagues are poured out upon the wicked, Christ comes, the islands move, and the mountains fall. Well, we just had an island move on the first day of the new year. Yes, the country of Japan is an island. Babylon, the kingdom of the dragon, is destroyed, and the wedding feast begins. Now, on New Year's Eve, my children called out and said, "Hey, everyone, come look at what's in the sky. Come out and see this." So we all came outside, and my daughter said, "Look, it's Chinese lanterns." We could see that someone had taken those lanterns that you light with fire and they go up into the sky, and somebody had set off a bunch of those lanterns. And look what they formed the shape of when I took a picture. There it is again. There's that image of the dragon. There was definitely some symbolism in the Chinese lanterns. Chinese lanterns, red dragon, pay attention. Seeing these Chinese lanterns in the sky reminded me of the constellation Draco, or the dragon. The Chinese character for the dragon is long, which I feel has something to do with where we get the word long in English, as dragons and these sea serpents were long creatures. Now, this is just on the Wikipedia, but as I looked at this information connected to the dragon constellation or zodiac, these words stood out to me: earth and the season of spring. The dragon's element is the earth, and its season is springtime. Well, since this is the year of the dragon, it's interesting to me to notice that in the springtime of this year, on the earth, here in the United States, we have this great American eclipse that's going to cross over and make the X on the New Madrid fault line. I first began talking about this back in 2017 with this first eclipse, and we talked about how this seemed to be fulfillment of the woman spoken of in Revelation chapter 12, the woman clothed in the sun, and how we know that story plays out in connection with the dragon. Now, 7 years later from this eclipse in 2017, we have the second eclipse that crosses over on April 8th of this year, 2024. Now, in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, where it talks about the woman and the dragon, notice the dragon has 7 heads. Here are some depictions from medieval times of this chapter. You see this dragon with the 7 heads, and the woman is above it. Now, at the end of chapter 12, it says in the very last verse, verse 17, "And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." Now, in the book of Genesis, chapter 41, Pharaoh has this dream, and the dream is interpreted, and it talks about this 7 years cycle. You have the 7 years of plenty, and then the 7 years of drought and famine. And it's interesting because in his dream, we read in verse 26 that the heads of grain, 7 heads of grain, represent years. So we have these heads representing years. Now, isn't it interesting that we have this dragon with 7 heads? Could those heads represent 7 years? We have this 7-year period between the first great American eclipse in 2017 and the second great American eclipse in spring of 2024. Now, I've always believed that heads represent rulers and crowns represent authority or power, but it seems that there is also this connection to 7 heads, and the 7 years between these 2 eclipses. Now, when I saw this medieval depiction of the dragon, it looks like green smoke or green liquid coming out of the dragon's mouth. It's actually supposed to be the river of water that the earth swallows up in the book of Revelation. But because it looks green to me, it reminded me of this. The constellation Draco, or the dragon, lies in the far northern part of the sky. And because of its position in the North Pole, it never sets. It can be seen at any time of year. And it's the same for Polaris, the North Star. Because Polaris is so close to the celestial pole, it traces out a very small circle over 24 hours, so you can barely see it moving. It pretty much always stays in the same place, and therefore it's a reliable way to find the direction of north. Polaris is 8 times the mass of our sun and 2,000 times brighter. Polaris is a 3-star system. It consists of the supergiant Polaris A and 2 smaller companions. The companion stars are Polaris AB and Polaris B. Now this is interesting because this reminds me of the Godhead. I did that video about Rh negative blood. In fact, it's one of the most popular videos on my channel right now. It has completely gone viral, and a lot of people have commented on there about how the blood sample that was taken from the Shroud of Turin and that was tested to be AB type blood. AB is the rarest type of human blood in the world, and according to this article, scientists estimate that the AB blood type is shared by as little as 4% of the entire human population. AB positive represents 3.4%, and AB negative only 0.6%. Now, scientists say they don't know whether his blood was AB positive or AB negative, but they all agree that this can be considered a royal blood type. So the article goes on to talk about how his blood might have become AB, and it talks about a theory that would be that Mary's blood type would also be AB, and she passed that on to Jesus without the contribution of a human father. However, there's another theory that says in most cases of AB children, one parent contributes the A and the other contributes the B. Now, the author of this article is Catholic, and they don't believe that God the Father has a body of flesh and bone, so they believe this theory to be impossible. But the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we know through modern-day revelation that God the Father has a body of flesh and bone. It's fascinating that this 3-star system called Polaris is made up of 3 stars known as A, B, and AB. If these stars were to be telling the story of the conception of Jesus Christ, it's very fitting. You have the Father star, which is the biggest and brightest, A, and the second brightest star being Polaris AB. And then the furthest away star that is closest to the earth and is the dimmest of the 3 would represent Mary, who was human, Polaris B. So you have Jesus Christ that was born of deity, his Father in heaven, who is God of the universe, and then you have his mother who conceived him, Mary, who is fully human. So when you have human and deity coming together, you get this star, Polaris AB, which appears next to the Father star and shines that glory, that brightness. And I'm seeing 144 on the screen right now as I read this. It says medically, the AB blood type is the universal receiver. It can take into itself any other type of human blood. There is an important theological message here. Dr. Serafini calls this type of blood the universal solvent. That is, that it can mix and dissolve all other types of human blood into itself. This is an astounding conclusion that fits perfectly with the saving mission of the Redeemer of mankind. Inasmuch as blood signifies human suffering, each and every human being that has ever lived or ever will live can join his sacrifices to the saving blood of Christ to participate with Christ in the ongoing redemption of the world. So you have Polaris, the North Star, right at the center of that North Pole, and then you have Draco, or the dragon, sort of surrounding it. as though he's trying to overtake it, overcome it. And isn't that what the adversary does? He always tries to mimic what it is the Lord is doing. This reminds me of the video I did about the maypole. I will have a link down below in this video description if you want to check that out. But in that video, I talk about the origins of the maypole, and I talk about the pole that Moses held up, the rod that had the serpent at the top, and it had this dead serpent, symbolizing Christ overcoming the adversary, Christ overcoming death. And the children of Israel, all they had to do was look up, look to God, and live. And many of them wouldn't do it, and they fell victim to the poisonous serpents in the desert. Here we have this North Star at the North Pole. It just reminds me of the maypole, and it reminds us to look up and look for that true, steady direction, the covenant path that leads to eternal life. The North Star symbolizes our Savior Jesus Christ because He is a constant in our life. He's always there, and if we look up and we look to Him, we too will live. Okay, so let's talk about these solar flares and the effect that they have on the earth and how that relates to that image of the dragon spewing out the green stream. So the Earth's magnetosphere has a magnetic field that shields us from the particles emitted by the sun. When a CME, or high-speed stream, when I think of stream, I think of water, stream, just like what's coming out of the dragon's mouth, released by the sun arrives at the Earth, it interacts with the magnetosphere at the very beginning. If the arriving solar magnetic field is directed southward, it interacts strongly with the oppositely oriented magnetic field of the Earth. This results in the Earth's magnetic field opening up in layers like an onion, which allows the charged solar wind particles to stream down the field lines. The solar particles eventually hit the atmosphere over the poles, resulting in the magical aurora borealis. For the Earth's surface, a magnetic storm is a quick drop in its magnetic field strength, which lasts roughly 6 to 12 hours. So we get these incredible northern lights. At this point, I had an impression to go study the dragon in Japanese and Chinese culture. And here's what I learned. In Japanese culture, there is a dragon called the Yamada no Orochi. According to legend, it had an 8-forked head and an 8-forked tail. Its eyes were red, and on its back, firs and cypresses were growing. It crawled over a space of 8 hills and 8 valleys. This dragon is kicked out of heaven. And it's interesting because when you look at this image right here, here's a picture of it. It has these 8 heads. It almost sounds like this beast in the book of Revelation that has 7 heads. In the book of Revelation, we read about Lucifer, who was also cast out of heaven and became known as the dragon. He gives power to this beast with 7 heads that rises out of the sea. And the meaning of the Japanese name of this dragon means big snake or large serpent. In fact, in different legends and mythologies throughout different cultures all over the world, it seems as though every culture has a story about a similar dragon that a young man or hero, such as Hercules, slays with a sword. In fact, in Greek mythology, that dragon had 9 heads. So it's interesting, we have 7 heads in the book of Revelation, 8 heads in Japanese legend, and 9 heads in Greek mythology. 7, 8, 9. Now apparently, this is on the Wikipedia, comparing folklore about dragons and serpents. 8-headed creatures are much less common than 7 or 9-headed ones. It says the Japanese numerals ya or hachi, and shows the symbol, can mean many or varied. So according to this, it's likely that the legend just said the dragon had many heads, but because 8 is stereotypical in legends about kings or gods, this number may have been adopted. And I couldn't help but notice that this Japanese symbol for many reminds me of the greater than sign when doing math. We were always taught to remember it means greater than when it looks like an alligator mouth eating the number. And I'm seeing 1144 on the screen right now. All throughout history, these serpents or monsters of the sea, dragons of the sea, were described as having a head like an alligator. Well, eventually, this Japanese dragon is defeated by a man named Susanoo, which is interesting because that name Susanoo kind of reminded me of the name Zeus. Zeus, Susanoo, sounds very similar. Zeus is the sky or thunder god in Greek mythology. And it's interesting because all throughout Native American stories and legends, they talk about the great white spirit being a god of thunder. And I've talked about this before in connection to the Norse gods, the Greek gods, the Great Spirit, how there is this connection. Now, in some of these accounts that I read about Susanoo, they referred to him as a deity with heavenly parents who is associated with the sea and storms, thunder and lightning. So he defeats this dragon with a sword. And this sword happens to have a name. It was called the Ame no Murakumo no Tsurugi. In other words, the heavenly sword of gathering clouds. The name was later changed to the grass-cutting sword. And the sword represents the virtue of valor. Again, I've talked about this before. Swords always pop up. In folklore and fairy tales, I think of the sword and the stone. I think of the prince slaying the dragon to rescue the princess and the kingdom. This same story is repeated all throughout history in different cultures throughout the world. Now, I've talked about this before in past videos. I believe in the video where I talk about the Year of the Dragon 2024. And when I hear the word dragon, I think of the word draconian, which means excessively harsh and severe, an oppressive government, an oppressive regime or leadership, imposing excessively harsh and severe laws and punishments upon the people. When I think of the word draconian, I think of the name Dracula. I believe I've talked about this before. The name of Dracula means son of Dracul. In the Romanian language today, the word or name Dracul means the devil. It also comes from the Latin word Draco, which means dragon. So interesting when you think about this word Draco, dragon, draconian, and you think about this excessive, harsh, and severe government that oppresses and punishes. And then you think about the country or nation whose national animal or symbol is the red dragon. China is the red nation. Red always symbolizes communism, oppression, war, blood. And the Chinese view this dragon as a representation of good luck, strength, and health. The dragon is a symbol of the emperor, as he was the most powerful man in China. So the dragon was to be his symbol.
I think we can all agree that the adversary is really good at mirroring or mimicking Jesus. And I think John is being very deliberate to show that that's kind of what Satan does. He tries to imitate and he tries to tear down, and he does it through mimicry.
Well, here, remember how the dragon was red? When Jesus comes, he comes dressed in red. Again, it's that play on I am the Messiah, worship me. But Jesus comes dressed in red because he took upon us his sins. He earned every drop of that red. Satan never did. And it's always that I'm trying to come off as something that I'm not. Are you fooled by an imitation? There's the Lord's wine, and then there's this cheap imitation that's alcoholic that intoxicates you.
Yeah.
That's what he is. He's an imitator.
Yeah.
Well, I decided to read up a little bit more on dragons. And so I opened up to my subscription on ForgottenBooks.com. And look at this. The very first thing that pops up in this huge archive of books happens to be a promotion for the free book of the day, which happens to be called Mythical Monsters, which happens to talk about dragons. there it was. Interestingly enough, right underneath that book is a book called The Political History of the Devil. Now, I hadn't even done a search yet for the keyword dragon, and this was already coming across my path. Well, I decided to check out the book Mythical Monsters. As you can see, here's some screenshots up on the screen. And there was a whole chapter section starting at chapter 6. The dragon, the Chinese dragon, the Japanese dragon, the sea serpent. So I started reading, and it says the dragon is defined in the Encyclopedia Britannica for 1877, which is when this book came out, which is why I love ForgottenBooks.com, and I have a subscription because I feel like these older books have a lot more information than we do today, as a lot of our history and a lot of truths have been removed. So I love reading these older books. The name given by the ancients to a huge winged lizard or serpent. They were regarded as the enemy of mankind. Again, this goes back to the Garden of Eden and the serpent. And its overthrow is made to figure among the greatest exploits of the gods and heroes of heathen mythology. A dragon watched over the gardens of the Hesperides. These were the nymphs of the evening and the golden light of sunsets, who were the daughters of the evening. Interesting, because when I think of the daughters of evening, I think of the daughters of Eve, which is a whole nother topic for a whole nother video. So I hear that this lizard or serpent watched over the garden of the daughters of evening or Eve. And this is just me and my own theory going out on a limb here, but I've always wondered if prior to the fall, I know that I read somewhere that the animals in the Garden of Eden could talk with Adam and Eve, and it was normal. And Adam named all of the animals, and he knew them by name individually. After the fall, that communication ceased, and the animals were no longer able to communicate with Adam and Eve or their posterity, but the animals could understand them. It's just that Adam and Eve and their posterity could no longer understand the animals. There was no more communication. I've always wondered if the serpent was at one time, prior to the fall, a beautiful animal that possibly played a significant role in the Garden of Eden. It was a trusted animal. It was a beautiful animal. Possibly it watched over the garden. And for some reason or another, it allowed Satan to influence it, to deceive Eve into partaking of the fruit. We know that it was Lucifer conversing with Eve, but is it possible that he did so in disguise by possessing the body of the serpent? Because I used to wonder as a child, nobody ever brings up the point that a snake or a serpent is talking to Eve, and how come that isn't unusual to her? Well, it wouldn't be unusual if that's something that's the norm. Remember, this is prior to the fall. Well, anyways, Satan deceives Eve, and in the scripture passages, he's referred to as the serpent, and then God curses the serpent. And in Genesis chapter 3, verse 14, it says, "The Lord God said to the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. And upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life." Now, it doesn't say that God said this to Lucifer. He says it to the serpent. He says, "You are cursed above all the animals of the field." He's speaking to an animal. And so I couldn't help but wonder, is it possible at one time the serpent might have looked different? Today, when we think of a snake, we think of a not so beautiful looking creature that slithers, has scales and fangs, is poisonous. Most people are afraid of snakes. But could it be at one time, prior to the serpent being cursed, that it looked different? Because I remember reading this as a child and thinking, well, how is that a curse? If the snake already slithers on its belly through the dust of the desert, how is that a curse? That's what a snake does. That's what a snake is. So then I began to wonder, maybe that's not what a snake used to be. Maybe the serpent looked different. Maybe it had arms and legs. Maybe it wasn't covered in scales. Maybe it became the serpent that we know today because of this curse. Well, it turns out this isn't a silly theory. I went to the church website, and this is actually what our doctrine teaches. I don't know how I missed this scripture, but it says on here, in the Genesis account, the serpent speaks to Eve and tempts her to partake of the fruit. The more complete account in the book of Moses points out that Satan is the one speaking, although he does so through the serpent. Here it is in Moses chapter 4, verses 6 through 7. And Satan put it into the heart of the serpent, for he had drawn away many after him. And he sought also to beguile Eve, for he knew not the mind of God, wherefore he sought to destroy the world. So I want to pause right there because it says that Satan drew away many after him. And that is true. He drew away 1/3 of the hosts of heaven. They chose to follow him and were also cast out of heaven. Verse 7, and he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And he spake by the mouth of the serpent. It's because of this moment right here in the Garden of Eden that the serpent, the snake, the dragon, forever becomes associated with Lucifer or Satan. Anyways, just some food for thought. Just had to throw that out there. Just had to get that out of my mind. So later on in this book, it talks about some depictions on the American continent in primitive works of art that depict the snake and the dragon, which at this time was believed to have been borrowed by Celtic wanderers and their mythologies from the far eastern land of their birth. In other words, Asia. It says the Indians of the northwest coast frequently repeat in their well-known blackstone carvings the dragon, the lotus flower, and the alligator. And then it goes on to talk about the red dragon. And it says the author of British Goblins suggests that the prototype of the red dragon, which haunted the caverns and guarded the treasures in Wales, it says we must look in the lightning caverns of old Aryan fable and deduces the fire-darting dragons of modern lore from the shining hammer of Thor and the lightning spear of Odin. So here's a screenshot of the Welsh dragon, which appears on the national flag of Wales. Apparently in ancient legends, there was a white dragon which represented the Anglo-Saxons, and the red dragon represented Wales, which defeats the white dragon. So this is talking about conflict and battle. Because Wales defeated the Anglo-Saxons, or in other words, Wales defeated the king of the Britons, this is why the red dragon appears as a symbol of the country of Wales. In fact, the red dragon was used as a supporter on the royal arms of all Tudor sovereigns of England and appeared on the standards of Henry VII and Henry VIII. The red dragon did not become an official royal heraldic badge until 1800 when George VIII issued a royal warrant confirming the badge blazoned as, on a mount, vert a dragon, passant with wings elevated gules. And here's an interesting piece of history. In the 1909 National Pageant of Wales, the Welsh dragon appears upright on a white background. The Welsh dragon that appears on the flag on board Captain Scott's Terra Nova is also an upright dragon sergeant on a white and green background. Up until this point, there was no standardized version of the Welsh dragon. The dragon was used on banners during women's suffrage events in Wales in the 1900s and 1910s. Accession documents include a note from one of the former members, quote, "The banner was worked by Mrs. Henry Lewis. She was also president of the South Wales Federation of Women's Suffrage Societies. She led the South Wales section of the Great Suffrage Procession in London on June 17, 1911, walking in front of her own beautiful banner. It was a great occasion, some 40,000 to 50,000 men and women taking part in the walk from Whitehall through Pall Mall, St. James Street, plus Piccadilly to Albert Hall. The dragon attracted much attention. Quote, "Here comes the devil," was the greeting of one group of onlookers. Now, apparently, there were some additional chapters to the book of Daniel that are no longer included in the book of Daniel that we know in today's Bible, but these chapters are still read by the Catholic Church. And one of these chapters is called Bel and the Dragon, which is chapter 14 of the extended book of Daniel. And apparently it talks about, quote, "There was a great dragon which the Babylonians revered." It's believed that sometime after the temple's condemnation, the Babylonians worshipped the dragon, presumably a snake or a lizard. The king had said that unlike Bel, the god that they were worshiping, the dragon was a clear example of a live animal, so it gave them that image. So here's an excerpt of these verses. It says, "Now in that place there was a great dragon that the Babylonians revered. The king said to Daniel, 'You cannot deny that this is a living God, so worship him.'" So Daniel's being told or commanded to worship this image, this beast, the dragon. Daniel said, "I worship the Lord my God, for he is a living God. But give me permission, O king, and I will kill the dragon without sword or club." The king said, "I give you permission." Then Daniel took pitch, which is like a black tar, fat and hair, and boiled them together and made cakes, which he fed to the dragon. The dragon ate them and burst open. Now this is interesting too because I'm familiar with German fairy tales that talk about similar things. I know I've read a couple of fairy tales where the villain, which is usually a wolf, swallows the goats or lambs or Little Red Riding Hood, and a hero comes along and cuts open the belly of the beast with a sword or an axe and rescues the victims. In other versions of this scripture, the cakes were made of skins from camels that were filled with hot coals. This could possibly be where the fire-breathing dragon comes from. If the dragon swallowed hot coals, it could have been spewing out smoke. Now there's a similar story to this by a Persian poet where Alexander the Great kills a dragon by feeding it cowhides stuffed with poison and tar. So interesting to see a lot of these patterns throughout folklores, mythologies, and legends all throughout history. Now throughout this book and other books that I went on to read about dragons, of course they refer to it also as the Kraken. This comes from the legends of Norway. Well, then I came across some books on ForgottenBooks.com that were about dragons, but were actually tales about dragons. So I came across this old book on ForgottenBooks.com called Magnus Maharba and the Black Dragon by Christopher Cadmus from the original manuscripts. Printed in New York in 1867, possibly written around 1865. Sounded like a story, so I began to read it and listen to some of these passages that I read. It was several hundred years after the time of Christopher, I'm thinking Christopher Columbus, that a young giant by the name Sam Uncle, of course, a play on the words Uncle Sam, began to be famous in the country of the Occidentals. He was of celestial parentage, being a descendant of Frigga, the goddess of liberty. His eldest daughter, Fridimon, was a lovely creature whose extraordinary beauty, even in infancy, enchanted all beholders. I'm guessing Fridima is a wordplay on freedom. As she grew up, her fame spread throughout the island and across the sea and to the most distant lands. And the black dragon fixed his eyes upon her, and when he saw her beauty, he determined to make her his bride. Sam Uncle, or Uncle Sam, was the most extensive landholder on the western island, and he finally became possessor of all those rich tracts known as the United Occident. In order to encourage laborers to settle on his lands, he allowed the cultivators to occupy them without rent, supporting himself on the princely revenue that he was able to accumulate by trade with foreign nations. It was understood, however, that in case of war or other emergency, the occupants of the soil should bear the necessary burdens of the country. But the kings in some of the Northern countries, or North countries, were displeased at the liberality of Sam Uncle, for they said it is not good that the people should be relieved from their rents. This example will work mischief and will spread discontent among our subjects. And the king of Belea spake to Monarchia, the goddess whom he worshipped, in other words, the monarchy, and she bade him send over and collect the rents himself. For, said she, those people went out from your own kingdom, and therefore they are your subjects. So he sent over his messengers and his tax gatherers, as she advised him. But the people refused their demands, and declared they would pay no rent, tribute, or custom to the king of the Bullions. Sounds like the word bully, king of the bullies. And then he sent over his armies to contend with them in a battle, to vanquish and subdue them. This stood out to me. I'll read this little passage here. It says, "And now, my sons, said the old man, you had better get your weapons in readiness for fighting. This world is full of talk and sympathy, but talk and sympathy never yet protected the helpless. If you intend to deliver this hunted lamb from her persecutors, you must be prepared to do it at the risk of your lives. Blood is the purifier ordained to cleanse the stains of this bad world. See you not that the land is full of leprosy? It will require something more than water to wash it out. I am an old man, and my life is not worth much. You, my sons, are young. Do as you like. But as for me, I shall set myself against the foul monster that is working all this mischief. I will make my way into his fortress. I will enter his palace. I will stand at his bedside. God helping me, I will send a shaft that shall wing its way to his heart. I will open the doors of his dungeons and knock off the fetters of his prisoners." And the boys said they would go with him. Then Osami reached up his hand and took down from the shelf a book. I'm guessing this book to represent the Bible, which told of the black dragon and of the red dragon, his father, and how they warred against the Lord. I'm guessing the dragon represents slavery and captivity of the African Americans and Native Americans. So you have the black and the red dragons. And how the judgments of heaven should come down upon them in future times. After reading a while, he fell upon his knees, as his custom was, and prayed the great All-Father that he would protect freedmen and deliver the cushions from her sake. Interesting, the name cushions. It sounds like a word play on cush, and it sounds like that the cushions are supposed to represent the African American slaves, and that he would break the power of the black dragon and banish him from Norland and from Sunland and from all the green spots of creation, and seal him up in Tophet fast and forever. I'm guessing these two lands represent the North and the South, Northern United States, and this martyr is Abraham Lincoln. And Tophet looks like the word top hat. Now, to wear a top hat is a sign of freedom. So when he says he wants to seal them up in Tophet fast and forever, he's saying he wants to seal up the slaves into freedom. Anyways, it goes on to have this happy ending, and it talks about these eternal hills and their minds being illuminated. They saw with new eyes, and their shoutings were changed to tears of glad and wondering emotion, and they clasped their hands in prayer and gave thanks to the God of heaven that they had been allowed to look upon the face of so noble a king and martyr, the deliverer and savior of his country. It says the body of King Magnus Maharba was laid in a tomb. Lincoln was buried in a tomb in Springfield, Illinois. And it says that King Andrew II reigned in his stead. Well, that sounds like Andrew Johnson, who became president after Lincoln was assassinated. And where it says Andrew II, I'm guessing because Andrew Jackson would have been the first Andrew. Now, after reading some of that, I thought, what in the world is this? It sounds like it's talking about the United States of America, the Revolutionary War, and it's been written to be preserved in a fairy tale, which is interesting because I've talked about in previous videos how during the time of the Roman Empire, when they would go through all the lands and destroy people's histories and records, when things were being removed from the Bible, people wanted to preserve these truths, and so they knew they had to hide them. And so they did so in children's stories, fables, and fairy tales, which is why when you read these fairy tales, you will find a lot of parallels to the Bible. Now we know this was done back then, but it fascinated me that this was done more recently and on the United States soil. It's as though somebody wanted to preserve history, how it really was, or at least their perspective of it, and maybe knew over time at a future date a lot of those things would be changed, so they preserved it in a fairy tale, a fictional story. Here's what the introduction says. Sometime since certain curious manuscripts were discovered in the library of a New York antiquarian purporting to be chapters in the history of a king named Magnus Maharba. This sounds like a play on words of Magna Carta. The orthography was quite unlike anything known to the present generation and bore a strong resemblance to the Old Saxon, every sound having its appropriate character, while the silent letters introduced into our language by the Norman French were wholly wanting. This remarkable story has been published and widely circulated in its original form, but many persons find a difficulty in reading it on account of its antique spelling. The present edition will obviate that objection. The author of the work gives no clue to the time or place of the occurrences he has narrated. The publishers have a suspicion that it is not as ancient as it would at first seem, but they will leave the reader to form his own opinion after completing the story. The work in its original Saxon-like orthography may be obtained of the publishers Brown and Dewar, New York City. These are the names of the chapters. Origin of the Black Dragon, Sam Uncle and his daughter, Fredima, a play on the word freedom. Fredima becomes a wanderer. Osami dies for Fredima. Coronation of Magnus Maharba. Commencement of the Dragonian War. Bloody battles in Virgin Land. Guessing that's Virginia. Sam Uncle pleads for Fredima. Dragonian invasion of Norland, painful suspense of Fredima, liberation of the Cushions, opening of the Father Water, second invasion of Norland, Diabolian methods of warfare, triumph of the Fredonian arms, and martyrdom of Magnus Maharba. Anyways, there was lots of references to dragons in that story, which is why it came up in my search. Well, after reading that passage about ancient depictions here in North America of a dragon, serpent, lizard, and alligator, it made me think of Leviathan, which is a creature described in chapter 27 of the book of Isaiah, verse 1. In that day, the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword, so there's that sword, shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, the crooked serpent. And he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. So it's talking about this dragon who lives in the sea. The Lord will pierce Leviathan with his sword. We know that the Lord's sword is his word. It's scripture, it's truth, and it's truth that takes down Leviathan. In other words, the devil. Now, regarding the United States, especially during the Civil War, here is a map that breaks down these different alliances. If you'll notice, right where Missouri is the only state on the map that is a northern Democratic state. And you can see surrounding it are all the different colors. That's right where the borderline is between these different alliances. That is the borderline between the Republicans, the Southern Democrats, the Constitutional Union, and the Northern Democrats. So it had to have been a pretty hot spot, especially as everyone was trying to gain control of the Mississippi River during this time. And according to the Heartland theory, this exact spot where all of these states connect, where they meet, is where the head of Sidon was in the Book of Mormon, which is where some pretty powerful battles took place. I find it fascinating that this year, the sun, the signs in the heaven, again direct us to this exact spot on the map. X marks the spot when the second great American eclipse crosses over on April 8th, 2024. It will cross over this exact spot by the Mississippi River. As I've reflected this year on this nation and this promised land, I was reminded of something else that Lance Richardson said in his video.
Now, when he came to these different nations of the Iroquois, these were the Seneca, the Mohawk, the Oneida, Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Tuscarora. Many of the people accepted his message right off and thought, whoa, this is great. Taught them what he called the great law of justice, set up a system of checks and balances, rules of procedures, limits of power, and with a major stress on individual liberty. And he told them that one of the aspects that was really key to their society was that all people had to be equal in stature, that no one could be greater than another. And one of the most important aspects of that was men and women, that women had as much equality in their society as the men did. In fact, they had what they called the Council of Grandmothers. Now, they would nominate and elect, in a sense, I guess, the representatives from each of the tribes. They, interestingly enough, had 50 representatives, and each had one vote in this confederacy. Now, here's a part where I thought was most interesting. They had to make decisions by unanimous consent, by a consensus. A majority would not do, and they would continue to meet until they could reach a consensus. Then the decisions were then taken to the Council of Grandmothers. Because of their compassion and sensitivity and meekness, they believed that the woman had the ability to help them in making those final decisions. And so therefore, the men being the representatives, but the women would have a final say on what would take place. Well, it was a system that worked. And they said that when the European settlers started coming into our land and found this Iroquois nation, it was so powerful that it was really a force to be reckoned with. When they came in, they started breaking the Iroquois Confederacy apart. They started taking sides, some with the Americans, some with the Europeans, some with the French. It became a situation where eventually destroyed the Iroquois Confederacy. There was a young man by the name of Benjamin Franklin that came upon the story of Daganoweda and of the culture that he had formed and studied it and decided this was an incredible system. So great was the system, in his opinion, that he developed a plan called the Albany Plan based on the Iroquois Constitution. And he proposed it to the colonies as a way to bring a similar confederation. Franklin's proposal languished for several decades, and then one day in Philadelphia, the delegates turned to its provisions and made it the major piece of the final Constitution of the United States of America. Now, it's interesting to note that it was not only a piece of the details of the Constitution, but also the American eagle came from the Iroquois nation and their Constitution. It was their symbol, national symbol of peace. And Franklin and others decided that the eagle should also be the symbol of their peace. The Iroquois, they have the eagle sitting in a tree. They call it the Tree of Peace, and it's holding 6 arrows representing the 6 nations of the Iroquois nation. And, of course, the American eagle is holding 13, representing the 13 original member states. He taught them some very important principles on which to base their life. The day came when he came to the people and he told them, I must leave. The Creator has called me to another work. But before I leave, I want to speak to you one last time. And so they brought the people together on the Bay of Quinte, which is near Lake Ontario today. He spoke to them one last time. Now, interestingly enough, he asked them to dig a trench, and they buried their weapons of war and took an oath to not take them up again. They took a tree and planted it over the top, and he called it the representation of the tree of life. This tree they planted on an island out in the middle of the lake, mostly covered with granite. The white granite was to represent the purity, and it was a symbol very much like the wampum belt that was used by the Indian women as a representation of their purity during that time. Well, he spoke to them, and here are the principles he said he wanted to make sure they always remember. First was purity of mind and body. The moral stability of the people was most important. Second, he told them to seek to become one with the great Creator. The spiritual stability of the people was most crucial to the success of the society. Third, a society must maintain a counsel and force for self-defense, but it must be tempered by the guidance of spiritual understandings, he said. Thus, when a conflict arises, the councils of the people must include the military and spiritual leaders to make a decision as to how to deal with the problem. And then they would go to the Council of Grandmothers in making that final decision. Fourth, our action is the expression of true thought. By going out and doing good for others, we show this action. By so giving, we receive. Now, when we talk about solutions, probably the most common thread amongst all of these different cultures, as I've mentioned before, was they talk about the fact that if the family's destroyed, the society will be destroyed. Clearly to us, that should be a message of what is so critical to us. As I stood there next to death, I knew there was nothing more important in my life than my family and my relationship with my God. But suddenly nothing else matters. And unfortunately, we are living in a day and time when all too many of us have forgotten what really is important. I believe very firmly that the solutions that these different societies have come up with, one being by giving you receive, and another being by serving others, we really do create the good for the whole.
Now, we were encouraged as a ward to study this area training message that was given to Northern Utah back in November, and it was put on by Elder D. Todd Christofferson, and there were a few others who spoke as well. It was Elder Pearson, Elder Hugo E. Martinez, Elder Christoph G. Gerard, and Elder Brian K. Taylor. And so here is something that stood out to me. This was from Elder Pearson. He said that there were 4 things he recommended that we could do to become more Christ-like in our communities and help build Zion. Number 1, enhancing the joy of the Sunday church experience of the saints by helping them feel the love of the Savior. If you're leaving church on Sunday and you haven't felt love from the Savior, then we're doing it wrong. Number 2, ministering to one another in a higher, holier way. Number 3, creating communities of unity and belonging, void of contention, discrimination, or division. And 4, demonstrating Christ-like ministering leadership. Other counsel and teachings that stood out to me at this training were, first off, with Elder Christofferson, he spoke about joy that comes from our covenants and repentance. And he said that the Lord's promises from covenants come to us and bring us joy as we keep those covenants. This allows the Spirit to be with us. This allows us to receive forgiveness, especially when we forgive others, even when we feel like they don't deserve to be forgiven. Sanctification, salvation, and exaltation are more of those blessings that come to us when we keep our covenants. And then also, we are bound to Him. Because of that, we experience His power, which helps us overcome the world and the natural man. And repentance brings us joy by putting off the natural man. Also, if we put our covenants at the center of our lives and our homes will feel more like the temple, and the temple will feel more like our home. If we are to be Zion, we must make our homes more sacred and holy. We need to be more intentional in turning our homes into centers of gospel learning, gospel study, and strengthening faith and testimonies in Christ. Seeking and receiving and acting upon personal revelation is key. And of course, this is counsel from President Nelson that was being quoted. We need to be more focused on the temple and sacred covenants. This includes wearing the temple garments appropriately. They are a reminder and a symbol of our Savior, His temple, and our covenants with Him. And here's a wonderful example of the power of God in action during these tumultuous times. So this is recent from the Tennessee tornadoes. And the article says that there was a 4-month-old baby found alive by the grace of God, his parents said, after the child was sucked up in a tornado in Tennessee. He was found in a tree and he had no injuries. He was just fine. Now, the baby's name happened to be Lord, Lord. And this quote here from the mother says, the tip of the tornado came down and picked up the bassinet with my baby Lord in it. He was the first thing to go up. And according to the GoFundMe account, it says, Lord looked like he was placed on the tree gently, as if an angel guided him safely to that spot. I love this. It truly is an example of how when we are bound to the Lord, when we are yoked with him, we can experience peace in the eye of the storm. And speaking of storms, my in-laws who live in Germany right now, southern Germany, have been experiencing major flooding. This is the center of their town where they live, and the last time it flooded was decades ago. In fact, there's a little monument in the center of town that commemorates that flood, and they are now experiencing another flood of that magnitude. You can see that the water line is completely up the side of the wall and covering the paths. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about this symbol right here that I shared in my last YouTube video about the ancient voices testifying of the Book of Mormon. And I talked about this description that I read about in these Cherokee records that I purchased back in 2017. And the man sharing the record described this cross that he called the true Cherokee cross that he noticed as a symbol on graves and other places among the Cherokee people. And so I read the description and drew it out and shared it in that video and posted a screenshot on YouTube. After I did that, I was talking to my daughter and she saw it and she said, Mom, I know what that looks like. Now that day and the day before, she had been watching some of the Indiana Jones movies. She really loves Indiana Jones and loves the movies and had been watching some of them. And she said, Mom, the people in that movie have that symbol tattooed on their chest. So I went and Googled it, and sure enough, I found this. And I said, is this what you're talking about? And she said, yeah, that's it. Apparently, these characters in the movie are protecting the Holy Grail, and they have this symbol tattooed on their chest as a sign or symbol to show their allegiance in protecting the Holy Grail. So I looked this up, and it says, a brotherhood of the cruciform sword crosspin from Steven Spielberg's action-adventure sequel Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The brotherhood were devoted to protecting the Holy Grail, and members had the group's cross symbol tattooed on their chests. Although the cross would later become associated with the Spanish conquistadors, there was evidence to suggest that the artifact was originally a smaller brass or gold alloy crucifix from the 7th or 8th century, thought to contain a relic of the true cross. Interesting, because that's what the Cherokee people called it, the true cross. The true cross is reputed to be remnants of the original cross upon which Jesus Christ was crucified. Some of the cross was alleged to be within the collection of the Museum of Oddities, a small museum in Stuttgart, Germany, mostly dismissed as a tourist trap rather than a place of authentic historical interest by an unknown archaeologist working for the Smithsonian Institution when they visited the establishment in January 1932. A piece of the relic was also rumored to be contained within the 7th or 8th century crucifix that would later form part of the larger cross of Coronado sought out by archaeologist Indiana Jones in 1938. Thought to contain a relic of the true cross in its center, it was connected to Emperor Justinian II and held an inscription that was nearly identical to that of the Crux Vaticana, which predated it. Around the 16th century, the original cross was affixed to the back of a larger, more ornate, solid gold and pearl front piece attached to a golden chain and was complete by 1512. 8 years later, in 1520, Spanish conquistador Hernando Cortez gave the cross to Francisco Vasquez de Coronado and sent him in search of the 7 cities of gold, but Coronado lost it during his ultimately futile quest for treasure. At some point, the cross was boxed and hidden away in a burial site within a cave complex in what would become the U.S. state of Utah. That's where I live. And fell into legend as the Cross of Coronado. Word that the conquistadors had explored the caves and concealed treasure there later caught the attention of 19th century miners who opened up new passages in their pursuit of gold. The Cross of Coronado is a fictional artifact invented for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. During the development of the film's script, written by Jeffrey Boehm, the Cross of Coronado was originally the Cross of Cortez, given from Montezuma to Cortez. So interestingly, this is a fictional cross depicted in this movie, yet it's known as the true cross, which is interesting because in the Cherokee records, there is reference to this true cross. Well, anyways, a friend of mine reached out to me this last week and shared this with me, which was posted by Kevin Price from Discovering the Book of Mormon in the Land of Promise. He wrote, one of the reasons archaeologists throw the Michigan tablets and relics under the bus is because there are sawtooth marks along the edges of the tables. All archaeologists know the Adena and the Hopewell were too primitive to have made saws. This would require hard metals. Guess what? The Nephites had saws. This saw was part of the Elder Milton R. Hunter collection that Richard Stamps told the church to throw in the dumpster. Anyways, as you zoom in on this saw, there is a similar mark of this symbol. My friend noticed that and she sent it to me. So the saw was found on North American soil. The Cherokee, also on North American soil, apparently have this symbol that is very similar. Well, then this same friend reached out to me because she's currently studying Hebrew, and she said, here is a letter that we studied in Hebrew. It looks just like that cross. It says the 15th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Samek. The pictograph for Samek, in Gematria, it has the numeric value of 60. The pictograph for Samek looks something like a shield, whereas the classical Hebrew script is constructed of a circular shape with a squared left corner. According to Jewish Midrash, the Ten Commandments were written by the finger of God upon 2 tablets of stone made of blue sapphire as a symbol of the heavens and God's throne. According to rabbinic tradition, they were perfect cubes, but the letters bored fully through the stone. This was a miracle since the inner part of the Samek floated in place. The root of the word Samek means to lean upon, to uphold, or to support. The root is also found in the Jewish concept of samika, the laying on of hands upon the head of a sacrificial victim in a blood ritual of the Jewish temple, which was also a means of consecrating the priesthood. Biblical references to the root occur in ancient times. Samek may have represented a shield. Okay, so this is interesting because in the Cherokee records that I read in that video, the chiefs talked about a shield that they wore with symbols. It was very sacred as it protected them. They also talked about this lower priesthood that they had, but they were waiting for the Great Spirit to return to bring them his priesthood, the higher order of priesthood. So it's interesting that this symbol that looks just like their true cross, which represents the Great Spirit, in Jewish tradition, that same symbol represents consecrating the priesthood by the laying on of hands. It also means to uphold or support. I talked about in that video how in the temple we also receive a shield of protection that contains symbols. And there are so many similarities to that and these records of the Cherokee people. I came across this recent symbol that says Cherokee Nation, respond, recover, rebuild. And it's interesting, there appears to be a tree, but the branches look just like that triple cross with the 3 horizontal lines, larger, growing to shorter as you go towards the top. In my research, the triple cross and the double cross are symbols within the Catholic Church that represent levels of hierarchy. There's also a symbol among Native American pictographs which looks like this. Some people might think it's a double cross, but it's actually a dragonfly and represents swiftness, renewal, and rainfall. When reading about the Chinese zodiac of the dragon, I happened to look down and see this symbol for the ox. Now, the ox represents Ephraim. Many Cherokee crosses are depicted with just the two horizontal lines, so this stood out to me. And the information connected to this symbol is Earth, the number 12, and the direction north and northeast. I think of the 12 oxen that hold up the baptismal font and how they represent the role of the tribe of Ephraim, who is to gather in the tribes of Israel from all across the earth, with the headquarters of the restoration in North America. Anyways, as I've been thinking about this year 2024 and how I felt inspired to put out that video at the very beginning of the year of these ancient records and voices that testify of the Book of Mormon, this being the year that we study the Book of Mormon in 2024, which is also the year of the dragon. Isn't it interesting that the year that we study this book, a book that testifies of the fullness of the truths of God, we have this dragon in attack mode. We have this rampant dragon ready to create chaos with this push to build Zion and her stakes and to strengthen them, which we do through our temple covenants. As we make and keep our covenants, they offer us great protection through the power of the Lord, which we will need as we face off against this dragon. Now, the world is looking at 2024 through the eyes of great fear and uncertainty with the elections that we face this year in the United States and all the things that have been happening behind the scenes with that, as well as most of the world believing that we are about to enter World War III this year. And all of the headlines at the beginning of this year, just this last week, again, are talking about the predictions of Nostradamus. As we look to our prophecies and our scriptures, as well as modern day prophets, the world looks to people like Nostradamus and his prophecies. And the headlines that they are subscribing to are those such as this. Here's a news article that says, looking ahead to 2024, Nostradamus predicted various events in 2024 and nothing that we should be looking forward to. So already it's setting the precedence that we should be afraid, we should be worried. His predictions apparently suggest that there will be confrontation with China, the dragon, turmoil in the British royal family, including the dethroning of Prince Charles and climate chaos, according to the Mail Online, the death of a pope in 2024, and perhaps most alarmingly, Nostradamus wrote about the beginning of a third world war 79 years after the end of the second one, which, if it comes to pass, would happen in 2024. Nostradamus predicted colossal tsunami waves that would devastate entire farmlands, along with predictions of climate chaos characterized by prolonged periods of both drought and excessive moisture. Nostradamus also appeared to predict a conflict causing significant turmoil in the ocean when he mentioned a red adversary, or what some people interpret as a red dragon. Anyways, this is the year where you get to make the choice which voice you want to listen to. Do you want to listen to the louder voices and headlines of the world, or do you want to listen to the quiet voice of the Spirit, which, if we follow those promptings, leads us to peace and comfort, as well as joy. Yes, we can have joy during a year when the world is experiencing fear and confusion. As we put our focus this year in studying and reading the Book of Mormon, a book that was written for our day. We are going to witness amazing things that will come to pass that I believe will be of a miraculous nature, which is all a part of that gathering of Israel. We can look forward to this year with a brightness of hope. As we continue to go to the temple and keep those covenants, we will be strengthened against these storms that are already happening. After all, we know how the story ends. Or should I say, we know what's in the next chapter, and it is amazing. I know that as we tune out these louder voices of the world, or at least which bring in an opposing spirit to the Spirit of the Lord, as we keep that out of our lives, out of our homes, and we focus on building and strengthening Zion, we will be blessed, we will be strengthened, we will find peace, comfort, and joy, and we will have much to look forward to. I know this is true, and I say it in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Thanks so much for joining me, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time.